All right, so welcome everybody to the another episode of Twitter Spaces presented by Industrial Logic. And today we have Paige Watson. He's a fellow colleague coach at Industrial Logic. He's joining us today to talk about deliberate practice, better code, better developers, and better life. Paige, why don't you start with a little bit of your introduction? Because we are also recording this session, and a lot of people who are not kind of available at this time will tune in and listen into the recording. So, for everybody, if you could give a little bit of your introduction, and then we can start talking about the topic.
Certainly. So I am I am a technical coach at Industrial Logic. Um, Before I was a technical coach, I worked as a developer of all levels, senior, principal, lead, all that sort of thing. And one of the things that I did was I kind of did the coaching role along with that. I thought that not just writing code, but getting better at how we write code and sort of learning as a team was really important. I still think that. Um, and so I've been sort of talking about these practices for several years now. And one of the really important things that I think that we don't often think about is how we practice and why we practice, right? Sports, um, music, even doctors, they all practice, right? But why don't we as software developers, how do we get better? So this is I have a few ideas. This is kind of what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, that's great. So, when I reached out to you, you about thinking about what are we actually going to talk about, and I said, whatever you're passionate about. So I know that you're kind of passionate about these topics, and so tell us more about what inspired you to think like this? What inspired you to talk about this topic?
Sure. So actually, it's um, a lot of it comes from working with my friend and fellow industrial logic coach Steve Quo. Uh, about boy, has it been 6 years already? Uh, he and I were working at a company in the Seattle area at a large insurance company, and we were reading books. Obviously, industry books about getting better, about developing practices, and that sort of thing. One of the books we came across that we both really enjoyed, and that I've kind of continue to reference is one called Peak by K. Anders Ericsson. And in that book, he talks about what he calls deliberate practice, right? And so it, let me step back and talk about when we're learning a new a new skill, right? We don't. There's a thing called the learning performance distinction, and the learning performance distinction is that when you are in learning mode, your focus is on knowledge growth, and you tend to produce less. And when you are in performing mode, your focus is on production. So you learn, and I mean you really inherently learn less. And the anecdote that I often use is, how fast do you type? If you had to guesstimate right now, what do you think you type in terms of words per minute? Right? 60, 80? No, those are pretty good rates of typing. I'm probably in the 60 area. I'm not a super fast typer, but I do all right. I've been typing for 25 plus years. It's been my job as a developer. My job is to type, right? I mean, it's to solve the problems and write the good code. But the medium through which I do that is typing. Why don't I type 300 words a minute? If just doing makes us better, and I am a little better. I gain little bits here and there, but if I offered you $1 million to type 300 words per minute in 2 weeks' time, what would you do? Would you go out and just sort of start typing some stuff, or keep doing your work and try and get better by not making mistakes? Probably not. What you would probably do is you would get a typing tutor program. You would, not do your work, but get into that learning mode, and you would focus on learning to type quickly, even small, first A and then AS and then ASD and then actual words. And as you do that, you build up that knowledge and that speed at typing, because you are in that learning mode. Now you're not writing sentences, you're not writing books, but you are getting better. I don't know if you could make 300 words per minute. Unfortunately, I don't have $1 million to ask somebody to try it. But this is the whole idea of this getting better at writing code. We really want to deliberately practice. We really want, if we want to get better, we deliberately practice. And so this all came from Peak by K. Anders Erickson. Um,
Yeah, so I grew up, hearing from my father, practice makes a man perfect. And I'm sure, you also have heard something like that. But now I think that even if you have to practice, you have to practice smart. And I think
yeah.
that's what you are referring to. So when we were talking about this, you referred to, other fields like sports and music. I know I have a fellow coach, Terry, who talks about the jazz ensemble and how they coordinate and collaborate together. Tell us a little more about that, how, you get the same inspiration from these other fields like music and sports.
Well, sure. First, I want to step back. You said practice makes perfect, and I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that perfect practice makes perfect, right? And can we get to perfect practice? I don't know, but there are ways of doing that, of making our practice better. Um, but if you think about, for instance, let's take a football club, right? They they don't just go onto the field and play a game every day to get better. They will start out with some basic skills. I mean, these people are being paid millions of dollars a year. They'll start out with basic skills, and they'll do the same basic skills drills every day. They will, instead of taking a bunch of shots from lots of different areas at the goal, they'll shoot from one place over and over. And they will sort of refine that and be in that practice mode. And maybe towards the end of the week, or as they're getting close to an actual game against another team, maybe they'll play some scrimmage type games. But that is not the focus of them getting better and doing their job. And the same with musicians. A musician doesn't just play a piece over and over. They play a note. They check, am I holding the note the correct amount of time? Is the tone quality correct? Right? Are my fingers in the correct place? They'll play a bar, or a set of bars over and over until they get it right. Actually, let's see. I had a friend that told me one time, professional musicians don't practice. So how is it? Oh gosh, now my brain is gone on that one. But basically, they continue to practice so that they don't make mistakes, until they don't make mistakes, right? And we don't just do that by playing the entire piece. We do that by focusing and deliberately focusing on little bits of it, right? There are some rules that I like to bring up around deliberate practice, and actually they're not mine. They come out of the book, by K. Anders Erickson. But those rules for deliberate practice are: have a goal or a focus. You can't just say, I'm going to practice sports, I'm going to practice writing code, right? Pick a single, simple focus. I'm going to practice um, conveying intent of my code. Or even simpler, I'm going to practice naming correctly. Or I'm going to practice fewest elements when I write code. So, one single focus that you can practice. You want to have some sort of expert coaching, right? Somebody that knows how to do what it is that you're trying to get better at. Someone that you can learn from that can give you that feedback. And this is really apparent when if you've ever tried to learn something really well by reading a book uh, without getting feedback, you get a good understanding, but you don't get knowledge in the sense that you would from being able to talk right to someone about it, to immediately get that question answered, to help you figure out if what you're thinking and what you're learning is the best or correct focus. You want to have consistent or rapid feedback, right? You want to be able to try something and immediately find out if it was correct or incorrect, if it worked, if it didn't work, how you so that you can, tweak your practice to make that better. So if I was practicing, say, writing code, and I was doing it on my own, and I wrote I did a kata, and then I submitted it and asked somebody to review it, and 4 or 5 days later it came back and there were notes, and like, how am I able to incorporate that into my learning at the time that I'm practicing? I might be able to incorporate it later, but I've probably gone on to some other focus or goal, or I'm out of that learning mode and into the performance mode now, right? So, well, you want to have consistent and rapid feedback. Um, you want to learn a little bit in your discomfort zone, right? So you don't want to immediately go into, like, let's pick a new language. I'm going to learn that entire language and I'm going to practice writing in that new language, and I have no idea how to do it. If you're too far into your discomfort zone, it can seem overwhelming and can really affect your ability to learn, because there's too many things to think about, too many things to learn. Instead, take baby steps into unknown territory, right? If we're talking about software, maybe you take a known piece of code and you focus on, I'm maybe going to refactor this with a strategy pattern. I'm going to try and learn this strategy pattern. I'm going to refactor with the strategy pattern. I already know how the code works. I'm comfortable. I've been seen it before. So let's just focus on trying this new pattern as opposed to learning the whole language, right? And then finally, you have to want to be there, right? You have to want to learn. You have to be focused and involved. So that's really important, right? Have you ever gone or seen people at, like, a learning session, a workshop that they were sent there, or they had to go because everybody on the team had to show up? And how much do they want to learn and be involved? And how much are they actually getting as opposed to the person who really wants to be there? So you want to have that need to learn as well. Those things, right? Goal or focus, expert coaching, consistent and rapid feedback, learning in your discomfort zone, having a foundational knowledge, and then being focused and involved. Those are all sort of the rules around deliberate practice.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna take a pause here to inform the audience that today we're joined with Paige Watson. He is a fellow colleague coach at Industrial Logic, and we're talking about deliberate practice, better code, better developers, better life. Um, there's a tweet that I've shared on top of the space above mine and Paige's head. Please go to that tweet, like it, and retweet it so we can reach out to more and more people. If you want to add something on the topic, you have a question, comment, feedback, please feel free to request the mic. There's a microphone icon on the left bottom corner of your screen. If you click that, it will send me a request and I'll surely bring you up. Um, John Carney is here with us as well. Hey, John, how are you doing today?
Good. Although I don't think I can type at 300 words a minute. Just saying. I'm not even sure I type yet.
Yeah, but do you want to add something about what you have heard so far?
Yeah, I guess maybe getting a clear understanding of deliberate practice, 'cause that's an interesting concept. Um, I think probably for a lot of, or for myself, and probably for a lot of listeners, what does that mean? I know you're trying to explain it. Um, I mean, I don't know if you've ever done a code retreat day, but those are fun ways to practice the same thing over again, an hour at a time, and try different approaches, and get more rapid feedback and pair and do cool things. Um,
Yeah, and they certainly are, and they tick all those boxes, right? You have a goal or focus. You often have someone who's there, coaching or facilitating. They have an understanding of what's going on and can answer those questions. You get that consistent feedback and rapid feedback. You learn in your a little bit in your discomfort zone. Most of the people there have an understanding of what it is, and most of the people that are there because they want to be there and they want to learn. So I love those. Anything like that you can do as a team, and I haven't even started talking about learning as a team, but um, there that's a great example.
yeah, they're a lot of fun, and we would do Friday afternoon coding katas, for lack of a better term, or just I forget what the website was. Something would have like challenges, and yeah, we just maybe I forget, maybe 10 of us developers on the team. We'd go in and just do them and have a lot of fun, and even a little competition, you know, just to see who could solve things differently. So yeah, that is fun, and I think it is an important not to just be nose to the grindstone, constant 100% on. Yeah, so I'm in favor of it.
Awesome. So Paige, you just mentioned learning as a team. Uh, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So John mentioned code katas, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about them. They are they're my sort of favorite go-to practice as a team, um, in terms of writing better quality code and learning as a team. Uh, some of the things that are really important, or the reason I would advocate for learning as a team, is because think about your friends that you still know from high school, from university. These people, you spent time with them, and you were all sort of in this boat together of learning. There was all this vulnerability around learning. When we do this as a team, we have a greater team cohesion because we start to get out of that production mode, not have to necessarily worry about, oh my gosh, we have to get this done, we have to write uh, this story has to be finished by this time. But when we move as a team out of that production mode into a learning mode, we can start to say, it's okay if we make mistakes. Let's try something. Let's learn something from it, and maybe it's something we can apply in our everyday production work, right? So you also, not only personal growth and team cohesion, you get that emergence when you practice together, that sort of rising tide effect, where you know I know one way to do it, you know one way, maybe you have an interesting way that I've never seen before, and when we're writing code together, uh, I get to learn it and try it, and like, oh, this is cool. I didn't realize you could do that. And then the next week, if we're doing another kata practice together as a team, now I'm working with someone else maybe, and I'm like, Bob over there did this. We should, what do you think about that? that rising tide effect brings everybody up. And not only that, um, we found that it helps to not have to document like code practices among a team, because those code practices spread organically, especially if we're practicing and being able to make mistakes and get that feedback and learn from it. And those really good practices, the way we want to work as a team, start to spread organically. There's definitely a psychological safety in learning together and all being able to make a mistake. And one of the ways that that comes out is once you get back to production style work, you start to realize it's okay to kind of say, I don't know, you know, can you do this? How do we do this? And it starts to be okay to say, I don't know how to do that, because the extra little bit that's added on is, but I can learn, or we can learn, right? And then you also have I think a more enjoyable place of work, right? As you grow together, as you learn together, and as you become a more cohesive team, it becomes more enjoyable. And honestly, there's also an increase of productivity, because the things we're learning we can apply to our code, to the way we write code. And because we're all learning together, and because that knowledge is spreading, we start to be able to easily understand everybody's code, and it starts to look alike. And therefore then we start to, I don't have to search and figure out what you're doing here, right? So there's an almost an there's an increase in productivity that comes out of that as well. I know it's a lot, but it is
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah. So that leads me to the question about, the teams and how they perceive it, and do they feel like this it's a waste of their time? They feel like, why they have to spend work time practicing while they can also do it on their own time. So I'm sure you get those kind of questions when you talk to people in different organizations. Uh, can you walk through us through how you handle that?
Yeah, I think so. That the is it a waste of time? I think that that is maybe an initial thought, that for teams that don't necessarily have a learning culture or a practice culture. In a sense, I think that maybe we think it is because we're out of that production mode and into the learning mode. But the more we do this, I think people tend to start to see the benefits. Now, the there's a weird reasoning around that whole, like, well, can't you do it on your own team time? Yes, I can. How often, I bought books and spent time learning and reading tutorials and trying stuff out on my own time. I enjoy that. I enjoy that learning aspect. But how often do I do that with my coworkers? Hey, after work, you want to spend some time writing code? That doesn't happen so much. And so the benefits that we get, the benefits of learning as a team, don't happen. And along with that, we have so much more to do outside of work, uh, that that the it just doesn't give you the same effect. Not to mention, does your work not want you to get better? I know mine does. Places I've worked, they want me to get better. They want me to grow. They want me to write better code. So there's an argument to be said of, if if you want me to learn and grow and become better at my job, so that our final product is better, is more extensible, that our teams are more cohesive, and like, why isn't this part of what we do? And so I do. There often is a lot of pushback, but I think that there are ways of talking to teams, to companies, about how important it is. And then there have been times when I've been on a team or with teams, and there are two or three people that are like, oh, that's cool, I'd love to try that out. And there are two or three people that are like, oh, I'm never going to do that, I've got to do other stuff and I learn on my own. And the answer there is great. We're gonna go over here, we're gonna do some katas, we're gonna talk about stuff. When you want to come join us, do so. Right. And that sort of gets more into talking about motivating the teams and that sort of thing. But what I've found is that if you start out with some people and they are interested in it, and they uh, learn how to practice writing code well, and they do it regularly, and you do it in a place, you don't go into another conference room, whatever, you do it right there in the center of the team. It's a little hard when we're all online, but you do it right there where everybody can see you. Slowly people come around, slowly people move towards being part of that. What is it, the 16% rule? That if you can get 16% of your audience, and now the number is kind of debatable, but the idea that is, if you can get 16% of your audience as early adopters to continue to do something over and over regularly, slowly, eventually, the rest of the audience will join. Does that answer your question, Munib? I know that's a lot.
Absolutely. No, that was really good. So we have a couple of other speakers on the panel. Uh, Fellow coaches at Industrial Logic, Perry Reed. Welcome to the space. Would love to hear if you have to say something on the topic.
Yeah, hey, Manib. I was thinking a little while ago, you asked the question, or you repeated the phrase, practice makes perfect. And, Paige, you had a great response to that it's really perfect practice that makes perfect. Well, I actually like a different phrase. I came across this years ago, and I've used it over and over. What practice does is practice makes permanent. And that's true whether you're practicing something that's a good skill or you're practicing something that is a bad skill. And so that kind of plays into what you were saying a minute ago, Paige, that whatever you're trying to do, if you're doing deliberate practice with the intent to improve, it really does require you to at least have researched it or found somebody who is perhaps better at it than you are, or a true expert, to guide you in what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just reinforcing bad habits.
Yes. And that kind of also goes back to when I was talking about sort of the rules or framework around deliberate practice of having an expert or a coach or a teacher that can help guide you into making sure that you're not practicing, in a way that's going to reinforce the negative or the not the best skills.
All right. So, Tim, you're also on the panel. Welcome. Would you like to add something here?
Oh, is that me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's some fun kinds of practice that I think, are worth addressing. I mean, the value of practice is fairly obvious. The question is, is it something you can infinitely defer, or do you need to get started? And the answer is, if you want to get better, you need to get started. But one of the things I found is useful in coding is to get something working. And when it works, do a local commit on Git, save your work, and then go find all the different ways you can break it. Because I found that experts know what all the error messages mean, and beginners need to learn that. And the best way to learn that is by intentionally making mistakes when it's not going to freak you out and panic you. Have you ever tried that, Paige? What do you think?
I have tried it. In fact, that's often how I learn, well, a lot of things, how I understand a lot of things, right? When I have a new, like a new language, maybe, or a new, if I'm working with a new, code base, totally do that. What happens when I change this from a 1 to a 2, and like see where the changes are. And that's a fine way of learning and understanding. To me, that's the same thing that I like to do when I move to a new area, is go get lost. Right? I know where my home is. I know which train station to go to, or which streets to turn on. But now I'm just going to drive somewhere where I don't know and see if I can get back. Right? And how do I do that? That kind of learning is I think knowledge growth, but not necessarily the same as the practice that I'm talking about, unless you did that over and over, right? Um, that the difference in what I'm talking about, and that goes back to sort of the having a goal or focus, right? In terms of deliberate practice, what is the goal or focus of that? And if it's to understand the code base, or to understand how it works, or whatever, that's fine. But being very having that intent, or having that focused intent, is a really important part of that deliberate practice. So I'll give you a good example, and this is one from Steve Quo, who's another technical coach at Industrial Logic and has been my friend for years. Um, he started when we started to kind of work on this and come up with this, and figure out how this actually worked. We started doing code katas, and I hear a lot about code katas. I think they're fabulous. I think they work really well for learning, but I don't think that doing a different kata, like every week, if you're practicing katas every week and you do a different kata every week, what is it that you're focusing on learning? I think in my mind, you're focusing on learning how to solve a problem, which is a great thing, but that's what we do every day, right? If you're focusing on something like naming, or getting rid of the dry, don't repeat yourself, getting rid of repetition, or refactoring of some sort, you don't want to do multiple different katas where you have to think about multiple things, right? In fact, uh, there's a great quote from a guy named Michael Polanyi, excuse me, Polany, and that's that an object becomes a tool as soon as you stop thinking about how to use it. And our tool, when we do this deliberate practice, is FizzBuzz. And I'm sure that most developers would be familiar with FizzBuzz. It's a very simple problem, and it has 4 requirements. And the first time, honestly, the second time you solve it, you know the answer. But that's finding the answer is not the practice, right? You can start to use it as a tool, because you don't have to think about the answer. Now we can think about, is my naming correct? Is am I writing the best test for this? Does it convey its intent? Is it simple enough? Right. So that's kind of the difference between I think what you were talking about, Tim, and what I'm talking about when I see that Steve has joined us as well.
Yeah, you mentioned him a couple of times, and I sent him the invite. So, Steve, if you can come up on the speaker panel, would love to hear your aspects on the topic. But I had a question, and from my experience coaching at one of these enterprises, is that uh, you know uh, software developers going through these code katas had one apprehension about being able to now apply these practices in their real production code base, and sometimes that is uh, those are legacy systems, and it's really hard to do. So how would what how would you strategize transitioning from learning these practices in terms of code katas and then bringing them in your actual code base?
Yeah, one of the easiest, quickest things that I see sort of transferred from our practices, like our practice katas, our practice time, to the actual production is when we practice conveys intent. Does our code convey its intent? And you can distill this down to, is it named correctly? But it's more than that. But even if we talk about just, is it named correctly? You say we're doing FizzBuzz, right? I'm going to pass in a number to FizzBuzz and expect it to return a string of, either the number as a string or the word fizz or buzz or FizzBuzz, right? But what's the name of the parameter that I'm passing into that function? Is it input? Well, what does that tell you about it? Is it number? Because I know it's a number. Well, we already, if you're using a strongly typed system, it's a number. So why would you call it number? What is its job? What does it do? Right? Could we call it number to calculate or FizzBuzz input, or like these are questions you start to talk about when we don't have to worry about solving the problem, but we have to more think about practicing and what is the focus of our practice. So we come up with these great discussions, fast feedback about what is the better way to convey the intent of our code. And so we practice that. And then what happens is you go back to your computer and you sit down and you open up your IDE, and there's a function that takes a parameter called data. And you're like, okay, this doesn't really tell me anything about what that's used for. I know it's data. That's what we're passing in, right? And so you rename it to something that is a little more it conveys its intent better. This is a practice that I mean, it's very easy to see and it's very easy to incorporate, and yet unless we take the time to focus on it and practice it, we don't necessarily get better at it. Right? That's a really easy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Steve was able to join us. Welcome, Steve. I know Paige and you work together, so you mentioned you got a few times. So I thought why don't we invite you and hear from you on the topic. If you can unmute and try to speak.
Yep. Happy to be
Okay.
here. Thank you for the invite. Um, Happy to speak. How can I help, or what questions can I help?
Yeah, Paige, could you include him on the conversation?
Sure. So we've talked a little about the practices and the sort of rules of deliberate practice,
Yep.
and then we were just sort of talking about katas, and how maybe the question from Munib was more around how does spending that time as a team practicing, how does that reflect in our production work, or how do we move that to our production work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when I stumbled across deliberate practice, it was by reading some research papers by a guy named K. Anders Ericsson. And I started thinking about it, and I'd been doing a whole bunch of code katas, and I'd do a kata 1, 2, maybe 3 times until I figured it out, and then I'd move on. And after I read about deliberate practice, I analyzed my behavior of what I was doing when I was doing those code katas. And what I was actually practicing when I do a code kata, figure it out, and then move on to the next one, is how to problem solve. And it was then when I applied that to how can I use deliberate practice, use the tool of deliberate practice to get better at coding myself. And so, Munib, the question that I would ask you would be, how can you apply these rules of deliberate practice with a team to help them to work better? Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it's it's about sort of turning the mindset and adjusting how you think about it to, okay, I need to get better at something, be it drive a golf ball better, be it play a song better on the guitar, learn my fingering better, learn how to do design patterns. Maybe I want to learn how to get better at the state pattern. How can I come up with a way that would allow me to practice that?
Absolutely, by doing it.
Right. And by doing it in small ways that you get feedback.
Yeah, and it's a little hard to practice or to learn something new that may end up being the better way of doing it by writing it into production code.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Then you're sort of putting yourself out there, and well, in some places, and it's fine to sort of, I don't want to say fail, but to to learn as you're writing production code. It's not always the most comfortable or safe thing. So you want to get into that place where you can learn without having to worry about, breaking the build or something like that.
Right. And that brings up a wonderful point, because there's deliberate practice, which is the act of practicing and getting better at something. And then there's another thing that's called, and it's human behaviorism has it, it's called the learning performing distinction. And what that concept talks about is that the human brain has two modes. One mode, it is in a learning mode and it's optimized for learning. The other one is it's optimized for performing. And what that really and when the brain is in those two modes, it does not do the other one very well. And it all has to do with risk and failure, the possibility of failure. When we're in a learning mode, we're in high risk and failure is acceptable. When we're in performing mode, we're in very conservative mindset and we don't take risks and we're not learning. We're falling back on established patterns. So the practice, although you can get better slowly in production code in a production setting, it's better to move yourself out of it into a safe place where you can experiment, you can fail and learn from it, and struggle and learn from it, and then apply that to the production code or production way of working.
Yeah. I had brought up the typing 300 words a minute,
Yes.
and it is exactly that, right? You want to get to that place where you can fail and use that feedback to learn, as opposed to sort of not wanting to fail and freaking out about possibly making a mess of production.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest fear that software developers have. If they don't have a safe environment, they don't make psychological safety a prerequisite, then you see those kind of symptoms where they are unable to, they do the cutters, they learn these practices, but they are afraid of transitioning them into the real code base.
Yep. Now, one thing I do some practices with teams where I introduce new concepts and ideas in a production setting with, say, playing around, refactoring in code, and then checking it in. However, that learning is not as optimized as if we were able to deliberately practice it. And a lot of times working with different clients, that is more of an optimal route because they're getting learning and we're producing something, even if it's not as optimal as being able to just learn it.
Awesome. I see some new audience members have joined. Thank you for joining. We are actually talking about deliberate practice, better code, better developers, better life. If you would like to contribute, ask a question, or share your experiences on how you practice and learn together, We would love to hear from you. So please request the mic. There's a microphone icon on the left bottom corner. If you click that, uh, you'll be invited up to speak up. So, John and Perry, you guys have been listening to all this. Would you like to share your thoughts at this moment? And
Well,
we can hear,
you
Steve,
got,
we can hear some keyboard strokes here from your side. So if you
Yep.
can mute while others are speaking, that'll be great. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
yeah, I'm not sure if I have any amazing things to add to what was already said, um, other than what I kind of said earlier. But yeah, I think the the key that I kind of stick with is when I've had the opportunities to work with teams, and especially co-located. I'm not going to say it's easier now being remote because you have to schedule stuff, but part of practice and being deliberate is early on. I would bring in brand new members of the team, maybe just folks out of the university, bring them into modeling sessions when we're starting a new feature or something major where we might need to model on it. So I think practice um, can be in the flow of real work, and that's sometimes more challenging. Like code retreat is fun because you can never get it done in an hour, and so
Mhm.
that's a fun thing to learn, to let it go, delete, change the pair and do something else. But in the real world, it's, I think, as important to me to really factor in the love of learning. I've been blessed to have that probably imprinted on me by my parents. And, so that's kind of how I put it into practice is every day in the flow of real work, involve others and help them learn and grow by doing. So I don't know if that resonates with you all, but that's kind of what I was thinking as I was listening.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I'm sure that others do too. Um, and it kind of reminded me. This is slightly off of the deliberate practice aspect, but part of some of the really good teams I've worked on have had learning as a not just a secondary or tertiary thing, but as a primary part of their work. And there was like when you're coming into work on Monday morning and you're going to do uh, some practice or some learning time first thing, right? At first, people are like, "Well, gosh, that's why would we start with that?" And the answer is because it's important, because it's great for the team, because you can take what you learn on Monday morning and apply it to the rest of your work for the rest of the week. You know, and it's exciting to wake up and go, all right, I'm going to go to work. We're going to learn something, as opposed to I'm going to go to work and they're going to give me some work and I'm going to have to do it. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I want to say might have been yesterday. We're working with the team in South Africa, and I think there was some sort of like an aha moment, or somebody mentioned about learning. Might have even been one of my colleagues, and I quipped, "This is going after an old orange juice commercial, but like, yeah, a day without learning sucks. Like a day without
Yeah.
whatever that thing was. But yeah, a day without learning sucks. And frankly, the industry that we're in, if you don't, this, I know it's cliche, but if you don't learn how to learn, and I think there's a meta aspect to what you're talking about with deliberate practice. Some of it is the learning how to practice, learning how to learn, and that's, I think, so crucial to what we do for a living. It's like Yeah, it's also, I say it's a common thing with agile. Yeah, it really sucks to be agile because you can't ever stop trying to get better. I still suck at it and I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get better. It never ends because it's not a process. You can't it's like yoga. You can't master it. You can't, like I remember one time somebody said, "Yeah, I think we should have yoga in the Olympics." Like, what? It's like the antithesis of yoga.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I think it should be it's a lifelong thing.
You know,
And
so Paige brought up
go ahead, Steve.
something interesting with starting off as with a learning hour or some sort of learning, or move front loading your learning onto earlier in the week. This is something we stumbled across, and I stumbled across, and it made sense once I figured it out. Most of the time when I'm with teams, they like to put their book club on Fridays. Let's do Friday at lunch, or let's do it someday later in the week at lunch, because Mondays are too busy. Well, in life, we prioritize the things that are important. And by moving learning to the end of the week, we are subconsciously deferring that to something that can be thrown at the end of the week and postponed because, we have our sprint ends on Friday or Tuesday next week and we have to get stuff ready. We're just going to postpone our learning. If you start and you prioritize it and you put it on a Monday or Tuesday morning, it gives you a lot more benefit than putting it later in the week to be forgotten on the weekend. Now, one thing that I've seen with groups that I've worked with doing kata culture stuff is getting developers in the habit of doing Paige will like this, doing FizzBuzz every morning when they come in the office. And that's all you do, just one FizzBuzz. And I liken that to where athletes, what athletes do before they perform generally. They stretch and they warm up. And they do that by doing some simple rote task that they've done 100,000 times. And for me, that's FizzBuzz. So just come in, do FizzBuzz. When I'm in shape for doing FizzBuzz, I can do it in under 5 minutes without pushing it. I get it done, my mind's set, I'm focused, and I'm ready to code. So, yeah,
I
go ahead.
I was thinking of a really interesting because we actually had learning time on Wednesday at one point, and we were asked that maybe we should move it to Friday, and we kind of got together as a team and said, no, this is really important to us. Let's do it first thing, and that was really excellent because, like I said, it was exciting to get up in the morning on Monday and go, all right, we're going to learn something that we can then move into our work, etc. But the really interesting unintended side effect was that now the PMs and the business had a little more time on Monday morning to figure out what the priorities for the week were, and so there was some positive consequences that came out of that as well. But I definitely agree, and Steve, you and I have done FizzBuzz forever, and yeah, we joke about having nightmares about it, but it really becomes that tool, and even to expand that a little, we did FizzBuzz not just talking about good design, proper, conveyance of intent, but we started like, I wonder if we can write FizzBuzz as a strategy pattern, and I wonder if we can write FizzBuzz with no if statements. I wonder if we can write FizzBuzz with object oriented, so you don't pass a number in, you pass an object, and then you get a different object back, and like so. Going back to the Michael Polanyi quote about an object becomes a tool as soon as you stop thinking about how to use it. We were using FizzBuzz as a tool to allow us to focus on growing and learning other things. And I see that Tim, you had your hand up there as
Yeah,
well.
go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, there's an observation that I think might be helpful. Learning is one of those things that is infinitely deferrable. You can always get better some other day instead of today, right? So people tend to push it off. And one of the ways you can tell whether this is, the real work or the bureaucratic silliness is that the things that seem to be bureaucratic silliness, you'll tend to push off to the end. And that way, if you don't have time, you could drop them, right? So there's things I want to do at the end of the day, because if I'm too busy, then I can just skip it. Things I push off to the last Friday part of Friday because I don't really want to do them, and I might be busy with real work and not have to do it. People do that with the last Friday of a sprint when they're sprinting, or the week before a release if they're doing it annually. So the idea of let's not put this at the end because it's unimportant and that allows us to skip it because we're too busy doing real work. Let's bring it up front so it becomes something real that's important to us. That gives us a better chance to move that to the real work side of the line, that learning is really part of the job instead of it being some bureaucratic silliness the bosses make us do in order to keep our jobs.
Yeah, Tim, I love that. I was thinking, Steve, as you were talking, using the analogy of the athlete, they do that. They warm up before a game to sort of reinforce the muscle memory that they've been establishing for years. But they also do it to condition their body and their mind in preparation for the game. And they do it because I think it's fundamentally unsafe not to do it, right? And we don't approach our work as software professionals that way. And so I really like the idea of starting the day with some sort of an exercise. Maybe you could do it with a pair or the whole team, but something that puts yourself in the right mental frame of mind to do the work that you're about to embrace. That and really does get to if you break down the idea of deliberate practice. Deliberate means you got a plan, right? You're intentionally scheduling time to do it. And what I have found to be true in my own life is that anything that I really want to get better at, I have to be disciplined about making time to do it. Because if it isn't on the schedule and I'm not very intentional about when I'm going to do it, just like Tim was saying, other things become more important and I put it off. And eventually, a day's gone by, a week's gone by, a month's gone by, and I haven't done it. So that's just life.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out one thing. I was curious, so I looked this up. The person who holds the world record for fastest typer in the world is a lady named Barbara Blackburn, and her record is 212 words per minute.
Oof. Yep.
So even if you offered me $1 million, Paige, for 300 words a minute, I don't think I'm getting there.
See, Paige is an overachiever. I generally say 200 words per minute.
Oh, nice.
So, I was thinking about this, and so people definitely feel that I have an unhealthy fixation on FizzBuzz because I've done FizzBuzz probably 1,500, 2,000 times. But some of the design patterns that I've actually practiced with FizzBuzz are the factory pattern, strategy pattern, state pattern, chain of responsibility, visitor, builder, composite, decorator, and delegator with FizzBuzz. And it's a problem that's so easy that you can go in and say, okay, we're going to use FizzBuzz as our tool to deliberately practice today the strategy pattern. How can we make that happen? I've also used it. I've used it to learning to program using micro objects or in Smalltalk style OOP. And I've used it to play around with what's the best way to create the strategy with a chain of responsibility. Is it a builder? Is it a factory? I have 8 different permutations on just playing around with that, how to build that chain of responsibility that was ability to practice. I've created microservice environments in both AWS and Azure that allow me to put deploy 4 different services that do all the 4 different things of FizzBuzz and send messages back, which then allowed me to practice how to play around with eventing and either Azure functions or Lambda functions in the appropriate cloud service. So lots of different practice out there.
Awesome conversation so far. So we are about at the end time for the space. Thank you everybody for joining, and thank you Paige and Steve and everybody else on the speaker panel for contributing. For the audience, we do this every Friday on Twitter at 2 p.m. and we also do this on LinkedIn audio events every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central. So please follow me, follow other speakers on the panel, and stay tuned to our next event. Any final words from anybody? Paige?
I would say that it's really simple to start practicing, right? Take some time, grab another person. It only has to be one, and take 15, 20 minutes and do FizzBuzz, and then talk about, again, simple focus, right? Fast feedback, and talk about that, and it's that simple. It's that easy to start. So thank you, Muneeb.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Happy Friday, everybody, and see you guys next week. Have a great weekend.